Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Rob Ryan, and I am back with another incredible conversation on Entrepreneurial Thinkers. Something that touches all of our lives is medicine, drugs, drug therapies. Ultimately, whether or not we are healthy today, we someday will be in a position, or someone in our family is in a position where they are in need of some of the amazing innovations that our drug and gene therapy and cell research industries, our biopharma, life sciences industries tackles here in the United States. And when that happens, I would like us to better understand the thinking that went into how those drugs became what they became. And so this conversation that we have with DJ White, the young founder and CEO of a company called Cytodyme from down in San Diego, is an incredible insight into that industry and how it affects our lives, and how he and his team are driving like crazy, entrepreneurially speaking, to try and drive down costs, to create greater efficiencies, so that, as he says, no one ever has to be put in the position on their deathbeds or in their hospitals of choosing between debt and death. So if you're intrigued by that, come join us, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as we did making it for you. Hola, hello, hi, bienvenido, welcome back, or welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And this, as you know, if you're a regular listener, or if you're just joining us the first time, this is the show where I get to have weekly conversations with the best and brightest entrepreneurial thinkers across all sectors and segments of our society and our industries, as we come together through conversation to try and leave the world a little bit better than we found it. Today, I'm super excited about this conversation that we're about to have with DJ White, the founder and CEO of Cytodyme. DJ is a young lab researcher turned drug development industry entrepreneur who's on a deeply personal mission to streamline clinical product development for biotech's biggest and smallest innovators. With over a decade in the biopharma industries, after graduating from UCLA and now in pursuit of his MBA at UC San Diego, this farm boy, originally from Yorba Linda, California, is bringing cutting-edge automation to a massively complex industry, connecting research to the manufacturing part of the business with greater efficiency. He's been at the forefront of cell and gene therapy at huge brand companies like Big Pharma and Immunity Bio, and now he's driving transformative solutions within San Diego's biotech scene. But if not for a twist of fate and a bit of personal tragedy, at 14 years old, I might be interviewing DJ today to discuss the life of a modern-day Indiana Jones who's a history professor at UCLA. His is a really uniquely powered journey of self-discovery, commitment to something much larger than himself, and an indefatigable work ethic that has now positioned him at his still young age to be building on this forefront edge of tomorrow. In doing so, hopefully, and I hope this, I know he hopes this, the companies and scientists that he helps them to deliver more and more life-saving and changing drugs and therapies to market. And most importantly, does so affordably to get those drugs and those therapies into the hands of those families who need them most when they need them most. He's, in my opinion, having just met him, a bit of an old soul, and I'm grateful for him being here on the show and spending a little bit of time. For those that will be listening to this weeks from now, it's the night before Thanksgiving. So we're both getting ready to hop on a train and head our opposite ways here in Southern California to spend time with family and celebrate. And I'll tell you, I'll start the Thanksgiving stuff now. I'm thankful that DJ is here with us. So welcome, buddy.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to share more about myself and everything that I've been up to. So
no, it's a pleasure. I'll give our audience some context. You and I don't know each other, but we met each other this week in a pre-interview where we got to know each other a little bit. I got to understand your story a little bit. I'm fascinated by the complexities of what you work on, and we're going to dive into that right away. But I'm also really fascinated about sharing your story, right? Because at the end of the day, this entire show's thesis is about you, the entrepreneurial thinker, right? It's not called Entrepreneurial Thinking with Rob Ryan. It's Entrepreneurial Thinkers, right? So I want to amplify and explore the people who are attacking the big problems and or the big opportunities in our societies in different ways, right? Or with different levels of obsession and commitment. And you definitely fit that bill. We met each other as a result of a good friend, Jesus Romero from down in Tijuana in the San Diego region. He met you not that long ago at an event somewhere, I think. And immediately when he and I were talking about my podcast a few weeks ago, he was like, hey, I've met this young guy in San Diego. He's in the life sciences industry. Like, if I've ever met somebody who should be on your show, it's this guy. And I thought to myself, okay, I was like, make the introduction. And then you and I have gotten us to today. So again, thank you for being here.
Of course. Yeah.
So let's dive right in. Why is the drug development industry so complex, complicated, and so expensive?
Yeah. That is an incredible question to just come off the gates, swinging. So I think that when you look at the industry as a whole, part of the nature of why things are so expensive and why the industry it has a very jarbled and complicated mess when it comes to getting new therapies or new drugs to patients is by the inherent nature of the fact that where these things are going. These are going to your grandparents, your kids, yourself. They're very important. It is very important for these things to have a standard level of quality that in and of itself needs to be like a zero fail type of scenario, right?
Yeah.
I recently with, I don't know when this episode's going to be airing, but Elon Musk sending spaceships up into outer space and then catching them with basically toothpicks. That is also a zero fail mission, right? All of NASA is a zero fail mission. So
Right.
much in that same way, the biotech space, you're giving something to someone who is already sick. The last thing that you want to do is give them something that's going to make them worse. That goes all the way back to like the Hippocratic oath that doctors take, right? Of do no harm. That same oath almost applies to the industry as a whole when you're coming up with new innovative therapies for patients. So when it comes to why it costs so much, well, part of that is because you have a industry where you need to make sure that everything is perfect. And perfect, much like a Swiss watch or something like that, if you want it perfect and you want it to work the exact way every single time, then you have to invest a lot of money into the people and the facilities that you're actually making these things in, and there's a very long drawn out process. I think we have the benefit now of 2020 hindsight, where with the COVID pandemic, we saw how quickly a therapy could, or in this case, a vaccine could make it from the start and formulation. In fact, Scripps Research, one of the places that I have worked, was one of the organizations at the forefront of this research and coming up with a vaccine. And we saw how quickly the FDA and just the medical / biotech industries were able to turn something around. That is something that's only more recent. Most of the time, from start to finish, you take about 10, 15 years to get a therapy where you're making money off of it and it's going into patients on a regular basis. That is altogether too long, in my opinion. But when you have 10 or 15 years, that's people's salaries you're paying. That's, a building that you have to keep the lights on in order to keep your research going and do all of that. There's a lot of costs that are associated with it, unfortunately, but it is a necessary evil to get the zero fail kind of scenario that the medical industry needs.
Ultimately, it seems like, as I'm listening to you, it seems like that's a great analogy, right, to the rockets and NASA in that context, because ultimately it's either two outcomes. Either you produce therapies and drugs into the marketplace that harm people, like they literally kill people, right? Or the opposite, like you produce therapies and drugs and release them into the market and they do no good, right? They have no impact. And you can't, the industry, from the way you describe it, cannot afford to fall onto either of those paths.
Yeah.
So it has to be successful. Especially you tease something that leads me to my next question, which is awesome. You dropped a little like it's entirely too expensive in my mind, or in my opinion, kind of comment there, right? So I was going to ask you, you've worked in the industry for like over a decade now. Is this an industry that is dominated by what I would call entrepreneurial thinking and creativity, or is it an industry where there's a ton of opportunity now going forward for much more creative entrepreneurial thinking to have an impact and change the way these models work over, say, the next 50 to 100 years?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Rob. I think that when you think about the industry as a whole, I would be remiss to say that the industry doesn't lacks innovation. I mean, just the other day I was reading some articles about how the industry is looking into manufacturing a therapy inside of a patient already, so that there's no potential for rejection of host or anything like that. I mean, we're talking about turning the patient into the source of the therapy, so it's their body that's actually doing the fighting, and there's really no foreign entities that are coming in. There's no small molecules. You don't have to take a pill necessarily. It's something that your body itself, you're kind of just harnessing the power of a patient's body.
Right.
We have very powerful,
as the vessel, as the incubator for the drug development itself. This just came to mind. You're almost like using the human to co-produce the drug.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it's the idea of, up until recently, I mean, to use cancer therapy as an example, for many, many years, the standard of care was basically what I would consider, if we were to look at it in terms of an analog, right? It's like carpet bombing. When you're only aiming for one thing, you're aiming for that one cancer cell or that group of cancer cells, but you're just carpet bombing the entire ecosystem, right? Anything and everything is getting damaged. It's like radiotherapy.
Right.
Then past that point, you progressed into other areas like monoclonal antibodies, which is another kind of innovative therapy, which it utilizes the biology of a patient's immune system and reawakens it to go and attack a certain target. So that's cool. That's kind of like a precision, aimed. It's more targeted.
If we're going to continue the military references, yes, that's what it's like.
So then this next step, the one that I was just talking about, is almost like you're not only making the missile, you're making the warhead all in the patient's body. It's not in a factory outside somewhere. You're doing it all you're assembling everything on location, which has its benefits. So, to go back to the original question, yeah, I think there's innovation that is occurring in biotech.
Obviously.
Yeah. But at the same time, there is a severe lack of innovation when it comes to how we actually do these things.
Okay.
And what I mean by that in particular is, some of these processes that I've worked on are literally using the same technology and the same methodologies that someone developed in a lab in the 1980s. There are other things that have happened since the 1980s. One of them being, I don't know, the advent of personal computers,
right?
Or now at this point, the advent of the World Wide Web.
I was going to say the internet, right?
Yeah, or even more recently with artificial intelligence and the whole resurgence and benefits that are coming from the efficiencies that you can get from those things. So we've made many large steps just in one area of the space where, the other day I was talking to someone who he was using a very specific type of equipment that today is something that is kind of ubiquitous across the entire industry. But the rate at which he was able to analyze things using that equipment in today's equivalent, it would take him back in the 1980s a day to analyze something, or multiple days to analyze something. And the accuracy and the precision of that instrument is nowhere close to where we are today. Now you can spend 20 minutes doing the exact same thing that 40 years ago we were spending days on. And that's where I would say we, as an industry as a whole, are needing to innovate a lot more, especially when it comes to clinical development and bringing on processes that are more advanced in what we're doing.
So I hear a lot of innovation on the science side, obviously, right? Constantly. I mean, it's the best and brightest people like you and others who are like just obsessed about particular diseases or problems and just put all of those years of education and collaboration into that. But on the, I'll broadly define it, my words, kind of the business / process, manufacturing, kind of the production side of things. It's just still woefully archaic or inefficient, getting better in some places. That's great, but like tons of upside potential to just be exponentially improved. And your thesis, which we'll talk a bunch about later in the show about Cytodyme, the thesis then being like, if we can improve, if not just you, but if the industry could improve a lot of the process, production, business side of things to be more efficient, to take advantage of more relevant technologies, even forward-thinking things, then that combined with the innovation on the side, it almost kind of will like keep up with the innovation on the science and then bring the costs of the entire journey and or the time frames of the entire journey to market down.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. And
okay.
Just to kind of like extrapolate on that a little bit more, because you did a great job at kind of summarizing that.
Thank you.
Is you do have a scenario where the current process to get approval of a therapy, like only in the last maybe 15 years did that process become something that wasn't printed out on just reams of paper and shipped over to like the FDA office building to get something approved.
We're like faxing things and mailing things still.
Not even that. You would put it in, you'd literally, the way that the industry used to work is you would get a giant rental truck and you'd include all of your data in a bunch of boxes and you'd ship it to the FDA. And
because they wanted like originals or something.
Well, they would want, you have confidentiality problems. Sure. You can't just, if someone goes and rips it open and they're like, oh, top secret information. Awesome. So only recently, and when I say recently, I'm talking like the last 15, 20 years, did it even get to the point where electronic, implementation of things is there. Imagine a world where, just like in other areas of compliance, things can be a little bit more automated. Things can be a little bit more, pushed on a lot of other areas in the space. And that just, there's all of this wasted time that instantaneously just goes away. So that's kind of,
if we improve on the business operations process side, if we improve on the governmental compliance, regulatory side, automation, technologies, efficiencies, that's ultimately going to make the scientists happier because their innovations, their great ideas are going to be able to get to market more efficiently. And then again, your thesis, like hopefully like get to wider market, right?
Yeah.
More affordably. I'm curious, talking about wider markets, right? And the end users, the beneficiaries of these things, the people that are meeting these drugs at the moment of need. Why is it that this industry, which touches almost all of our lives, definitely at some point in our lives, it touches all of our lives, right? Why is it so poorly understood by consumers?
That is a very loaded question.
Just purely, you can speculate. You don't have to speak for all humanity, but
I think that it's an important question that I believe we as a society need to answer sooner rather than later. In the United States, we're kind of our own niche environment where if you go anywhere else in the world and you turn on the television to like watch soccer or football is what they would call it everywhere else. You turn it on to watch that, you're not going to see an advertisement for generic drug / therapy, right? Meanwhile, and I only had this experience recently because I hate having advertisements. So I pay as much as I can to not see ads.
Okay.
But I was watching my Bruins play against the USC Trojans on the traditional rivalry game. And that's a live cast and there are commercials. And it blew my mind how many times I saw a pharmaceutical company advertisement for some random, drug or like ointment to help solve for some kind of autoimmune disease. It was just, there were so many of them. And anywhere else in the world, you don't actually get that, because everywhere else in the world, the way that the system works is a lot more different, or at least in different areas. And I'm talking not from experience, but from what I've read and understood. So, but with that being said, the American consumer of medicine is marketed directly to. They almost circumnavigate the doctor, the trained medical professional who has decades worth of knowledge in the space, and they try and inform the consumer of that medical. But then at the same time, there's a decade's worth of knowledge or more, 20 years, 30 years of knowledge that some doctors have in their specializations that make them suited to make these calls and make them suited to make these things. So then I feel like a lot of the perception of the, of consumers of medical goods like therapies and drugs is that we're not given that information. There's a marketing
DJ, I thought we'd get through an entire podcast without having to talk about misinformation, disinformation, right? But apparently I can't escape it in November of 2024. I mean, that's incredible. Like that's, I was going to ask you something about that you've now already addressed. But so the idea that part of the reason we as consumers probably just woefully misunderstand drug development and how these things that get to us and our family members that cost so much, that like the part of the reason that we don't understand that we have such a misperception of it as a whole is because of how that industry, which we don't understand, markets itself to us now.
Yeah,
that's fascinating. And also, I am about 25 years older than you, right? So I can speak to the fact that there is an arc of history back not that long ago while I've been alive, at which point that didn't happen. Yep. Like this has not been a thing on television or in media from my childhood forward. Like I didn't see a ad for a drug directly aimed at me until I probably in the last 20, 25 years, probably like and I'm 56. So probably since I was about your age, so, 30s, that's 1990s. That's not, so prior to that, like we also apparently, as you say, like the rest of the world did not directly market to consumers. And therefore we left the doctors to be the trusted source. That it wasn't our job to understand the industry or the drugs or how it got there. It was our job to trust the doctor. And, and now we've blown right over that.
Yep.
Oh, but my goodness.
And it's a double-edged sword too, because it would be ignorant to not also note that there's a lot of money that pharmaceutical companies are bringing in. There's also a lot of money that they're putting out to get new research in, to get new products in, and that whole ecosystem, it's kind of like a snake eating its own tail in a way. But at the same time, there's definitely questions that society as a whole needs to answer, in my opinion, where we determine what we want and how necessarally that should look. But that, to answer the question, that
you did.
What it is.
Wonderfully, you did wonderfully. I mean, we're exposing the places where entrepreneurial thinking or creativity, innovation, like sometimes just more honest thought can be applied in these processes, in these various journeys. So, wow. Okay, before we segue, I want to get in and start talking about you and your background and your story. And I think let's do a level set if we can before we get to that. So let's help our audience understand kind of the nuances that break out the different areas of research or products within this, what you and I have been talking about kind of in this broadest sense, the industry, right? So, and I'm just learning this from preparing for this conversation with you, right? There's drug development, there's cell and gene therapy development, there's cell and gene therapy research, there's just research. So if there is such a thing as kind of a lexicon that says, like, here are the basic areas that this industry is, the components it's made up of, help us understand that, Matt.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different spaces that kind of comprise all of biotech as a whole. My particular expertise is in the cell and gene therapy space, which is what you mentioned. And that's really kind of a new space on the playing field. I call it the bleeding edge of science. That is an intentional kind of pun there as well. Instead of the cutting edge, we're the bleeding edge, because a lot of these cell and gene therapies, they actually come from patients' blood. So what you'll end up doing is you'll have a patient, maybe they're sick, they need some kind of therapy. You'll go and collect a very particular type of blood from them. You can think of them kind of like white blood cells. There's a specific type called a T cell, and that particular cell is one that has really kind of a majority of the market in terms of cell and gene therapy. That's where a lot of scientists have focused on. There's also a lot of unmet needs that these types of therapies are helping kind of treat and solve a lot of problems for patients. Now, the industry as a whole is kind of broken up into a couple of different segments, and how they interact with each other is relatively complex. But you can start really at the academic level or the research level, which you also mentioned. So you can have a researcher, a developer who has an idea. They are really well studied and really well read in a particular aspect of the science. And they say, hey, I think I want to come up with this type of, maybe I tried this and do this and change that. And then voila, what do we get?
True experimentation.
Exactly. And this is at the basic science level is typically where those kind of come up. And that's the terminology, is like at the basic science level. And then you'll have those datas come out. You'll have the data out, and you'll have some other person come in and they'll look at it. Maybe they're entrepreneurial at heart. Maybe they are a product development person. Maybe that's kind of the area that they're in, and they'll look at the data and they'll say, And one such case that happened recently, which everyone's kind of heard about, is GLP-1 inhibitors. A lot of people have heard about those, the magic weight loss drugs that you can take.
Yep.
Those particular things were really discovered based off of basic science and people understanding how that particular interaction was occurring in a patient, which then led to when someone ingests that and their body processes it, they eat less, they don't have as much of an appetite, and that results in them losing weight. There's other areas.
If I remember, sorry to interrupt on this one, I remember reading some stories about it early on, right? It was an underlying, and I might use the wrong terminology, apologies, like drug that was aimed at like this targets this and will be helpful for these people with this disease. And then what you're saying is, if I understood it correctly, is like an associated benefit or an unexpected, like, oh, it's also doing this inside these people.
I'm not exquisitely well versed on it, but I think it might have been, and someone can probably fact check me on this, but I'm pretty sure it had to do with a diabetes treatment.
I think so too. I'm pretty confident that's what it was.
Yeah, and the doctors started realizing, the patients not only are like not suffering from as severe a symptom from the diabetes, but they're also now losing weight. And that kind of unlocked a whole nother area of research. A lot of people did a lot of analyses on those types of things, and there's a lot of science going on. It turns out the United States really doesn't like to be overweight. So the market as a whole
and yet a lot of us are.
Yeah. McDonald's tastes really good.
We don't like being it, but we are it.
Yeah. In-N-Out, McDonald's, it's hard to stay away from.
To say no.
But with that being said, I think, you have the research and development, then you have someone realize, this can help a patient in a certain way. That's where you get product development, clinical development. And that's its own space where it's kind of like pre-clinical trial. You're still trying to find out. Sometimes you go into animals, you do animal trials with standard organisms. Sometimes you don't because of certain ethical considerations that might be there. But you do a stepwise process so that you're not just taking something random and putting it into someone. You have to have at least a good idea of it is going to do some of the effects that you think it will, and it's not going to just hurt someone when you put it in them.
Yeah.
And then past that point, now you have an understanding of that. You want to put it into patients. You'll do healthy patients to begin with. So people who aren't sick, just to make sure, like, hey, I'm not going to kill someone if I do this. What are the side effects? What are things there? It's kind of more of a safety aspect. And that's all in clinical trials. And they're separated across. This is like a crash course in clinical trials right now. Awesome. You have a couple of different phases. You'll have your phase 1, which is safety. Then you'll have your phase 2, which is kind of preliminary data. And then you can get phase 3. And then phase 4 is kind of like you're approved, and it's just ongoing analysis of your process and iterative improvements and stuff like that. You can have certain therapies, a lot of cell and gene therapies, at least the initial ones, like the ones that were produced at Novartis, Kite Pharmaceuticals, Juno Therapeutics, all of those companies, a lot of them had what is called a phase 2, phase 3 pivotal trial. So they put a little slash mark in between the numbers 2 and 3, and that magically allows you to get a therapy approved a lot quicker. That, is a really interesting little sidebar there.
Yeah.
Also, the COVID vaccines, I believe, went on phase 2, like pivotal trials, like phase 2/phase 3, so that they can get to patients a lot sooner. That's neither here nor there. The clinical process, then you finish all of that, and then it goes into full scale commercial production and all of that. So in and of that space, you have R&D, you have your clinical, you also have to make these things. So clinical, you can think of that as the parts that are actually going to a patient. You can also think of it as a stage in the life cycle of a biotech company. And at that stage, you have to have many different teams that are involved. You have your manufacturing teams, your quality control teams, which they make sure that your product is good. You have your quality assurance, which makes sure that everyone actually is doing the right thing, and that the data that the quality control and the manufacturing teams have provided you actually are good and are complying with what you say they should. And then you also have product development and a couple of different teams in addition to that. Those all are, that's like, we went from really big and now we're zooming in a little bit further, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that kind of answered the question.
No, it 100% did. And also, man, no wonder it takes like 15 years.
Yeah.
and costs a lot of money, right? Mm-hmm. Like, talk about full circle explanation there. That was, that's fantastic. Thank you for that. And I think it gives everybody listening kind of a better sense of when, especially with what we're about to talk about Cytodyme a little bit. So they can kind of extrapolate and see where you're fitting in these processes, but also to the broader theme of the discussion, right? It just shows that there are kind of countless paths inside of the industry, as we started talking about in the broadest part of the funnel, for innovation and for entrepreneurial thinking by individuals, by collective groups, by investors, by teams of people who are researchers, teams of people who are, the clinical trials people, teams of people who are the manufacturing people. I mean, there's literally just kind of limitless opportunities for advancement and automation and improvement, which is incredible. That's exciting. That bodes well for our future, that this all does become easier to do and more accessible, et cetera, over time. So I teased it in the bio. I talked about it. I would love you to share some of your personal story, because it's absolutely foundational to why you are here, right? I said in your bio that I very well could have been interviewing the most famous history professor at UCLA, and you would have been talking to me with your fedora on as you swashbuckled across Egypt or something right now on some expedition, and you, because you thought you were destined for the first 13 or 14 years of your life to become the next Indiana Jones, and not the movie star version. Like, you literally wanted to be the character version, right? But you didn't, and instead you are this person here today. Why? Why is that?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, I was, again, very passionate about history and the arts and all of that. My mother really impressed upon me the desire to go and explore the world and to uncover things and learn as much as I could. And for the first portion of my life, that's what I was pursuing. I was very passionate about history, very passionate about the study of it. And then I got into high school, And I learned that my dad was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer that had metastasized across the majority of his body. And it actually had made its way into his brain. And it was a terminal situation. It wasn't something that he was going to survive, or at least that's what he was being told his prognosis was by his doctors. And it got to a point where he knew he couldn't just explain away why he was losing hair and all of that to his son. So he told me, and he ended up passing away my freshman year in high school. And yeah, it completely changed the direction of my life in more ways than one, I would say. He fought extremely hard, and part of the motivation that I have is a direct result of observationally looking at how he carried himself, both as a man and as someone suffering through something that they no one should have to suffer through. And yeah, so when he passed away, my life kind of 180 pivoted away from the arts and the social sciences. And my goal became, I want to make sure that I can at least positively influence the world in a way where no kid should have to say goodbye to their parent at a young age. No parent should have to say goodbye to their kid when they're so young. No grandparent should have to say goodbye too early or too late. There's too many times where friends and family, anyone who's watching this, they probably know one person at least who has been touched by cancer in some way, shape, or form in their life. And that's why my goal has become, over the course of the rest of my life, is to try and solve this problem, this really big problem that people are suffering from, a debilitating illness that no matter what we do, like, you can cure cancer. It doesn't mean that cancer is going to stop coming. It just means that you know how to fix it once someone gets it. But we need to get to that point, and there is a lot of work that needs to be done still. But yeah, my motivation from a very early time, 13, 14 years old, I completely pivoted from what I was doing in high school. So.
And thank you for sharing that so vulnerably. It's we talked in our first conversation when we met, and by no means was I comparing circumstances, but I was showing you that I could empathize with your plight because my dad had a heart attack at that same age, but survived, although it was quite serious and kind of had a shocking effect on our family. And then later, my dad died of pancreatic cancer and had a stage 4 diagnosis, and literally, called me on my birthday, or called me on his birthday. And I thought he was calling to complain about the gift, right, which is the end of April. And he called and said to say that he had seen the doctor the day before and he'd just gotten his diagnosis, and that practically speaking, there wasn't anything he could do. And those of us in the family kind of didn't know whether that was really true or whether that was just my dad being my dad and kind of having made the decisions that he made, that this is how he was going to do it and how his family was going to deal with it. But then he passed away on my birthday, which is like 7 weeks later. And thankfully, we got to spend time in there in between. And as you said, take some lessons away from seeing who he was in that state, which is incredible. So I'm deeply grateful for you for sharing that. The fact that it literally pivoted a 14-year-old boy to becoming the 30-something-year-old man that you are now, doing what you're doing, is incredible. And it's a great testament to both your dad and your love for your dad and your relationship, but it's also a testament to you and the diligence with which you approach what you do. So why don't you, now that we've kind of crossed this Rubicon, right? Like, talk to us about Cytodyme. Like, tell us, this is kind of your commercial. So explain to us what Cytodyme does, why it does what it does, and kind of where it fits in the market. Like, who are you trying to help? Who are your customers? What's the end result of this story?
Yeah, so I'll kind of start with the why. So when my dad was diagnosed with his cancer, he was kind of given a couple of options from his doctors. His insurance company was only going to cover so much, and there were better therapies that could have extended his life. maybe given him a better chance. But he was really given a choice between death or putting his family in insurmountable amounts of debt. And at the end of the day, it is my belief that nobody should have to be choosing between debt or death. They should always be able to choose life. And it shouldn't even be a choice in the matter. It should be a given. And that's really what formed all of Cytodyme from that point going forward. And my background in the cell and gene therapy space and specifically treating cancers in the cell and gene therapy space uncovered a lot of information for me over the last decade. And a lot of it is in how inefficient things are, to the point where I was like, my first job, I said, obviously I'm just young and someone has to have been doing some kind of efficiency automation, any kind of someone's got to be doing this.
I can't be the first one to have thought of this.
I couldn't have thought of that. I'm 21 years old at a random startup, and I'm not the first one to think of this. Kite ended up being wildly successful. They sold for $12 billion. It was a unicorn. It was one of the first cell and gene therapies. I went to another company, Immunity Bio. When I was there, I was like, someone has got to have thought of something. Like, I've been thinking about this. It's got to be coming out at some point in the near future. It's got to be. Nothing. Ended up, coming all the way down to San Diego to bring my expertise to Caliber, which is a part of Scripps Research. And, Immunity Bio goes on to get an approved therapy, the one that I was working on as well. And I'm sitting here in San Diego and I've said, dang, there is still no solution and nobody's coming up with this. So that's when I stepped in and I said, fine, if nobody else is going to do it, I'm going to do it. I was in the middle of my MBA program at UCSD. So I was building up this business acumen. I was building up this network in the San Diego startup community, as well as in the biotech space in San Diego, which it goes without saying, San Diego is the third largest biotech hub.
Yeah, it is the biotech hub. That is it. Yeah. That is the core of its entrepreneurial economy.
Exactly. So you have this biotech space. I'm involved in a lot of the entrepreneurial efforts. I said, shoot, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to pull the trigger on this and start Cytodyme. So what Cytodyme is building is we're building a B2B SaaS platform. It's also a connection tool, but it's designed to be a life cycle platform. So something that at any stage in a company's life cycle, they should be able to find value and find true benefit in what is being provided to them on our platform. And the way that we do that is the current industry standard of how we take a product from a lab bench and get it to a patient is one that's wrought in just a disjointed but interconnected web of manual transactions between people, manual processes. And whenever you have people involved, whenever you have different parties involved, there's value that is extracted, and that gets reflected back on the price that eventually makes it to a customer, right? So our general premise is we are streamlining from start to finish any and every aspect that we can in the process of bringing a therapy from a lab bench to a patient. And we hope to allow for better therapies to make it to patients faster. And really, we are a platform that is aiming to increase the efficiencies and really decrease the costs that companies experience from a very early stage all the way to commercialization and beyond.
So that little bug in your ear, the first 10 years of your career where you had that classic entrepreneurial thinking going on, which was like, I know I'm not that smart. Like, someone's got to be doing this, right? Like, you can't just be me, the 21-year-old kid. Like, and then you keep doing it, and then eventually you get to a place where you're like, all right, man, I'm going to have to do this. Like, no one else is doing this. And what I'm fascinated by is at some point in this journey, like, I think if it was poorly said, someone might say, well, you turned away from kind of the singular focus on cancer therapy, solve that problem. And I'm going to say it differently. I don't think you turned away from that. I think you just kind of stood on top of that. And that has become now the platform upon which then you look out into the entire industry and you see, oh, wait a minute, there's an even greater good. There's an even bigger impact that I could have at a greater scale if I can take what I believe is the solution set to these sets of repeated problems that have existed across the whole spectrum of the industry. And I can put this out there so that all big and small manufacturers and developers of drugs and gene therapies, et cetera, can do what they do more efficiently. Like, I can not only help families who need cancer drugs so that the next dad doesn't have to make a choice between debt and death. I can help kids who have spina bifida. I can help kids who have people who have MS. I can help people who have Alzheimer's. I can help the entire industry level itself up. Is that kind of what you were feeling or thinking? Because that's how I'm hearing it.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that is the general goal. There are a lot of inefficiencies that exist in the market, especially around this process, and any change that we can make here. A statistic that I like to share every so often is there are 3,400 different phase 1 or phase 2 cell and gene therapies as of the start of 2024. Some market analysis indicates that only 14% of those 3,400 are really going to become commercially viable products. In other words, approved by the FDA. The industry standard for biotech, just top level, is 43% at phase 2 or earlier. 43, that's pretty close to if I took my quarter right here and I just flipped it, right? That's a way better bet for a patient, a way better bet for an entrepreneur, a way better bet for a large pharmaceutical company. 43% means less risk. That's better for investors. That means more innovation can actually happen. If we can get that 14% number up to somewhere closer to 43, then we're solving a potentially $1 billion problem in the next 10 years. And when you look at the math, that's $100 billion. It's $100 billion for all the companies that are going to fail.
Right.
And they won't know that they're going to fail until they've already wasted the money. Imagine what could be done with $100 billion. Ooh, I can tell you, if you handed that to Elon Musk right now, if you gave him $100 billion, we'd have a colony on the moon. We'd have a colony on Mars.
Or he may have just tried to elect another president and hijack another government. But we won't go there. I'm still in November. I'm trauma processing, but it's okay. But I was thinking even before you said that, like, it is just an incredible amount of both capital and resource, human resource, intelligence, knowledge, time. It's just an incredible amount of waste.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I mean, to be able to close that gap, as Cytodyme's kind of reason d'etre, to like close that space and to improve those efficiencies and then give more of those companies developing those drugs, therapies, et cetera, the chance to succeed.
And we have to be realistic, right? Like, I can't take 14% and make it 43 and be like, and now everything's perfect. But what I can do is if that 14% turns into 17%, turns to 20%, how many parents are getting therapies now for their children, for themselves, for their parents? How many people are now getting a second chance at life because of something so simple as an efficiency that allowed a business to operate better, that allowed for the researchers who are working on these processes to actually do what they're best at? The research allows the business people to do what they're best at, making the business work and understanding it. And really, the solution that we're coming up with isn't one that is necessarily complicated. There's a lot of complication that can go into it, and we're building a lot of features to add into that. But at the same time, we're not like this is something that anyone should be doing. But the way that the industry is set up, and kind of our hypothesis for why this doesn't exist is because biotech companies, they're trying to get to their exits. That's how they work. That's how the industry operates.
Yeah.
If you're a startup in the biotech space, like Kite Pharmaceuticals, like I said earlier, $12 billion acquisition, they probably didn't have the capital to keep going indefinitely. So they had to be acquired. And that their whole goal was to get acquired by a large pharmaceutical company. Large pharmaceutical company doesn't want the risk of making a new therapy that costs hundreds of millions of dollars and they don't know if it's going to work. So they let a startup take the risk. And then once they get to a point where they're a healthy, palatable amount of risk, then they buy and acquire. They do an M&A. The other side of this platform as well, what I haven't talked about, is the manufacturing of these therapies. So you have the innovators who are coming up with the processes, but who the heck is actually making them? So, part of the problem in the space is you have plants or factories or manufacturing facilities that cost $100 million on average to build and tens of millions of dollars a year to maintain. You have people who, in order to make these very personalized cell therapies, like Rob, if you were to have a need for one of these therapies, your therapy is your therapy. It's not someone else's. Right. I have to have a team of people making your therapy for you. That is a team of 7 to 30 people that could be working on just your therapy. That's not a scalable economy. The Kite Pharmaceuticals has, I think, 3 global manufacturing facilities, one in Los Angeles, one in New Jersey, and another one in the Netherlands. There's 42,000 plus patients that need their therapy, and they're only able to treat about 19,000 as of the last time I read.
Wow.
This is a huge, huge problem. And a result is, because the plant and because the people both cost so much money, 65% of innovators of biotech companies choose to outsource their manufacturing to what are called these manufacturing partners or CDMOs, contract development manufacturing organizations. Okay. So then there's a whole nother aspect of this economy and this system that exists where you have to find the right people to even get connected to and start making your product.
Yeah.
And
I'm listening. It feels like a Russian nesting doll.
Yeah, it is.
The industry just has all these components, and it added together, it makes the whole.
Yeah, and then at the end of the day, the people that are on the manufacturing partner side, their goal is to get deals to keep going and to keep capacity.
The incentives are all misaligned in some ways, or very specific to particular outcomes for particular players in the spectrum of the industry. And what you're saying is, if
neither side.
Yeah, right.
Neither side wants to actually make something like that, because if I was a biotech, I'm not going to waste money on making a platform that's going to help me once and then help a bunch of other people.
But your thesis, the thesis that underlies Cytodyme is, we'll make it. We'll build the tools that you don't want to build to then improve the processes that you do want to improve your processes. You just don't want to invest in building the tools and the software and the automation to do it. We'll hand it to you kind of in a box, so to speak, right, for a cost, and then you could apply that. So there is an interest in applying technologies to improve processes. They just don't want to be in that business of improving the processes themselves.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. So and there is your market opportunity.
Exactly. And to give you a perspective of this, there's a company that is kind of at the forefront of automating the manufacturing of these therapies. It's called Solaris. You can look them up.
I've heard that name. Yeah.
Yeah. They recently signed a deal. I think it was over $400 million with Bristol Myers Squibb to translate a manual process that they have into a actual automated process on what they call their cell shuttle. This is theoretically, it's already an approved therapy that they're now trying to move into this automated platform for manufacturing purposes. Imagine if a company had access to these types of automations at a much earlier stage. That, in a nutshell, is the premise that the question that Cytodyme is asking every company is, imagine if you had access to these things, to enterprise level automations before you got acquired. Does that make you a more valuable acquisition target? Did Bristol Myers Squibb want to acquire a cell and gene therapy and then spend an additional $400 million to make it more affordable so that their profit margins could actually fit the bill and get them an ROI? These are the questions that we're asking potential customers and potential development partners.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about 25 years ago when I started my first company, which was a software company. I'll never forget, we had lunch in New York City with my co-founder's cousin. And my co-founder's cousin in 1999, 98 was a investment banker, private equity guy in Manhattan. So, I mean, just picture the prototypical money guy in New York City, right? And he listens to us at lunch, and he's, intrigued by us. He's listening to us because his wife told him he had to listen to his cousin's pitch that day, right? We had to buy him lunch, even though his income was like exponentially more than ours. And at the end of it, I'll never forget, he said to me, and I'm thinking about it because of you, he said to me, this is awesome. I'm sure it's great. He says, it's not for us. That's not what we do. He says, our whole business is we invest in the plumbing of the world. And I was like, wait, you invest in plumbing companies? And he's like, no. We invest in the plumbing. He says, like, we invest in the stuff that's below the stuff that everybody else is buying and selling. He's like, so if you were coming here and you were trying to sell me, and he points out the street, he's like, trying to sell me that street, I'd tell you that I'm far more interested in investing in all the piping that is 50 feet below that street here in Manhattan, because it's that piping and those tunnels that essentially allowed Manhattan to be built in the first place. And, and as I'm hearing you, I'm thinking like you're taking the less sexy route, and you're applying entrepreneurial thinking and innovation to the plumbing, the infrastructure, the inner workings behind the entirety of the drug, gene, cell therapy industry, and saying we can help you automate and improve these processes, and you have many stakeholders that can benefit from these automations being applied. That's awesome and really exciting. What like the selfish, forethought here, like what does it look like in 5 years if it's going well?
Yeah, so 5 years from now, the fun fact is that Cytodyme actually started as a hardware play. We actually wanted to make one of these boxes that could automatically manufacture things, because there is a really critical need in the space in terms of how much facilities cost to manufacture and how much people cost to actually manufacture these things. So originally we wanted to be that. But what we realized is we've spoken to over 150, we're close to 200 potential customers and subject matter experts now in the space. That's like 7 or 8 people per week, I think is what we average. But either way, for that in particular, we realized that nobody's going to do any of that. Nobody's going to automate early. Nobody's going to go into any of these things if they don't have a guide in that, if they don't have a beacon to follow, if they don't have some kind of way to help bring them on. And if you do that right now, like a lot of the times you have consultants that you can hire that have the experience that can go and do that. Well, great. That's not future proof though. That's just them right now. They have that experience and that's what they can do. But in the future, when the next big thing comes out, when the next automation comes out, how do you get companies on that? How do you adopt that faster? Going back to what I said a couple minutes ago, we're using technology from the 1980s in some of these processes. There has been a significant advancement since then. So how do you get them on there a lot quicker? In our 5-year plan, if everything's going exactly as I intend, which let's be realistic, it probably won't.
When I ask these questions on the podcast, we get to suspend reality. Like this is your entrepreneurial dream. If it's all going the way you want it to go, what does it look like?
So in the next 5 years, what I envision is a platform that enables for the world's first truly virtual biotech company to exist. And what I mean by that is a company that doesn't have brick and mortar, that doesn't even have scientists working for them on their list of employees. This is a company that will be able to go from effectively an idea to executing and collecting data, either by outsourcing that collection through research organizations or through CDMOs. And then they would be able to manufacture those products without ever having to have their own clinical manufacturing on site or at all.
Wow.
And then after that, they would be able to either bring that manufacturing capability in. Let's say they get an approved therapy. They would be able to utilize the platform to understand what their facilities' needs are, get connected to the right real estate providers and landlords that can provide them with the space that they need, the equipment suppliers, reagent suppliers, all of that stuff they can do at virtually the last possible second before they have to be making this on their own. And then if we're doing exceptionally well, the idea would then be that they'd actually be able to utilize one of these manufacturing facilities that are completely automated. And they don't have to ever bring on the exceptionally high capital expense that's associated with rehoming a manufacturing process in cell and gene therapy. At the end of the day,
the ultimate process improvement company.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, what I envision is, these cell and gene therapies right now, they have to be manufactured at facilities. Like I said, Kite has an LA, a New Jersey, and a Netherlands site. What I envision is a platform that exists at a point of care. So at a hospital, local, regional hospital, where a patient can go in, get their cells collected. The manufacturing can be done on site for them. And then they can come back in a couple of days and know that what they're getting is of a high quality standard, at the best quality standard for them, and receive that life-saving therapy as best they can. That level of just optimization and flexibility is going to it's going to be a completely new age of research and development for companies. The first virtual biotech company to ever exist is going to be a unicorn, period. Because if you look at an investor term sheet for biotech companies, like when an investor is looking at that company, they're like, holy crap, how much capital is going to have to be spent before what's our ROI? If I can speed up the process and remove all of those capital purchases from a biotech company, how many investors are going to invest in new innovative therapies that can get to market faster and be better for patients? My guess is going to be a lot.
A huge vision.
Yeah.
No, I love it. I love it. Because that's, first of all, the world needs people to think like this, right? I say oftentimes when I'm blessed to have these conversations with really smart, obsessed people like you, is that I'm lucky. I love the fact I'm optimistic about the future of the world, because I wake up every day knowing that there are people out there like you and like all these other folks that I get to talk about, who, when they wake up in their worlds, they obsess about one particular problem that I don't obsess about, right? But I will benefit from it being done better. And that is absolutely what you're doing. Incredible. Thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
Last segment, last question. And we're going to pull you out now, pull you, like, deep breath. Let's stretch our muscles a little bit here. Yep. Because I want you to go back and think, right? You were my goodness, you were a young kid when you decided to make these massive changes in the directions of your life. But then you were, a young lab researcher at UCLA, and you were just learning the industry and applying those things that you are now singularly motivated by. So if I was to ask you, talking to young entrepreneurial thinkers who are buried in labs and research jobs across the biotech industry, what are 2 or 3 of the most important things that they should focus on when building their careers or their businesses?
That's a great question. So I think the first thing that I would really say that comes to mind initially is it has to be something that you're passionate about. It has to be something that you can't sleep at night knowing that something still exists or that the problem is still there. And, to kind of harken back to when I was in high school, I was one of the lowest performing people in my grade. I was a part of like an accelerated program. It was called the International Baccalaureate in high school, but I was I was getting some bad grades. Turns out when your dad's dying of cancer, you don't perform well in school. But either way, after that experience happened, he passed away. I proceeded for the next 4 years to go from the bottom of the pole to graduating in high school valedictorian, getting a nice ride to UCLA to study biochemistry. At the time, I think it was the second best biochemistry program in the United States.
Sure.
I went from not anything to a lot on one thing very quickly. And, we talked about this in the pre-meeting, but and it's not something that I tend to share too often. One, because I think it makes me look a little crazy. But when after he passed away, I had a picture of him that I hung up on my door when I left. It was him in his hospital bed, and he was managing to smile at me. It was just my dad smiling at me in a situation that, by all intents and purposes, was absolutely the worst place that you could be. You're going to die. You know that things are going to suck, and they already do in more ways than one. And you're managing to smile back at someone to give them hope. And I had that picture hung up in my door. So every day that I left my room when I was growing up, I had that picture ingrained in my head of, no matter how hard it gets, there was a man that existed at one point in time who looked at me and smiled, even though he knew he was about to die, to give me hope. So all I can do is try and give hope to other people. And that's why I
filled you with the passion. Like that. Yeah. That's that initial fuel, right? That obsession that, like, I can't sleep because I have to solve this problem. So we're saying now, obviously not everybody is going to live through the same traumatic experience that you did, right?
Please don't. I don't hope that on anyone.
Right.
But have that passion.
Be driven. So of the 2 or 3 things, that's one, is be driven by that. What else?
So I would say the next most important thing is to surround yourself with people who care about you, and to surround yourself with people you care about. And friends, family, whoever that might be. When you're making any kind of like life-changing decision, which could be choosing to become an entrepreneur and take that big step of, I'm going to create a solution that nobody's done before ever, and it's this unique thing, the people that are around you are the ones that are supporting you. And, if it wasn't for my friends, if it wasn't for, the family that I have left, if it wasn't for my wife, Lauren, like, all of those people are the ones that prop me up so that I can focus on this thing that I've obsessed over for the better half of 2 decades. And without having those people, it becomes a lot more difficult. And as an entrepreneur at an early stage, you want those people to be working with you too. So having a good people that you're surrounded with and a good support system is going to lead to that success. So, having that passion to solve a problem and having the people around you to support you while you do it are key indicators for me to someone who's going to become successful. I'm not there yet, but I have the confidence that I have the passion, and I know the people that are supporting me. But awesome. To kind of tee it off at the very end, and this might be a little bit more of a contradictory take, because it is my belief, the reason why I wake up in the morning, I don't wake up saying, I'm going to be a filthy rich person someday because I've got the idea that's going to make me stinking filthy rich, right? That money, at an early age, I was like, man, if I just had the money to solve the problem, it's just the money. And if I had money, I could have a nice house. If I had money, I could get the car I want. If I had money, I could buy the food I want. Losing someone very early on in my life, what I learned is that money means jack diddle. You don't take it with you when you leave. Whatever you have or don't have, you don't take with you. It's time. Time is the most valuable thing that you have. And wake up every day understanding that time is that thing. that is your most valuable asset, and don't go wasting it on the silly things in life. That doesn't mean don't go have fun. That means, like, obviously maintain your sense of self and do things that you enjoy. Don't always work. I don't always work. I mean, you see this like YouTube setup that I have. I have a YouTube channel. I play video games. I do other things.
When we spoke the other night, you were in the car going to the driving range or somewhere or something.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. So do things with your time that set you up for success as well. So be passionate.
Be driven by the passion, right? Surround yourself with great supportive people, and realize that money's not the driver. Instead, make time the driver. Like appreciate the finiteness, the finite nature, I should say, of time, and also I often say the urgency of it.
Yeah. You said I was an old soul when I came on. I didn't believe that until I just gave those three things.
Look at that. No, and old soul can mean so many different things, and to some people they probably don't understand it. To me, it speaks to someone regardless of age who has depth and a sense of self and a sense of the world at large that is maybe beyond their years, right? And I used to have people say that about me when I was younger, and so maybe I have something in my DNA that I can spot it in other people. But when I do, I like to make sure that people understand that, because I think it's a gift, and it's a gift you have. So, hey, DJ, this was an absolute pleasure. You know, for the audience's perspective, oftentimes I'm talking to people that I know really well, or I've known for decades or years. We just met, and yet the minute we met and we had our kind of pre-conversation, I was teed up and ready for us to have this conversation, because I just think you bring so much value to the world. You are in this industry, in this space, in a world that I don't think about on a daily basis, right? That is yet so connected to my life and all the lives of the people around us. You are the epitome of an entrepreneurial thinker, and I'm grateful for you spending some time with us today.
Well, I'm grateful for getting invited to be here, Rob. It really was fun. This is like the first podcast that I've done as a CEO of a company. So,
nice.
Thank you for being my first, and for really being so accommodative and asking such great questions.
No, that's my pleasure. We love it. How can folks, if they want to find out more about Cytodyme, or if they want to follow you on social media or your YouTube channel, like how do we find you or follow you on social media? Like, or what's the website of the company? Or, we've got a lot of investors in our community. If there are folks who are interested in investing in this community, we have a lot of friends of the show down in San Diego, and obviously that means they're a part of the biotech life sciences industry. So how can those or anybody find and follow you?
Yeah, so the best way to contact me is dj@cytodyme.com. That is my email. I answer it all of the time.
Awesome.
If you are interested in learning more, if you want to help in some way, be it financially or through your own talents, please reach out to me. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm Dennis White on LinkedIn. That is my dad's name. I'm Dennis Jr., but I try and honor him by having that name up there on LinkedIn. And then our company website is just www.cytodyme.com. That's CYTODYME. And I'm sure
we'll put all this in the show notes. We'll share it all. We'll link it all. Everybody will be able to find it there too. So
yeah, but awesome. Those are the best ways to contact me. Cytodyme is also on LinkedIn. You can find us on LinkedIn too. We post updates there all the time.
Great. It's terrific. I will just close by saying this, and I can say this as great assurance as both a dad of someone who is almost your exact same age and now a new grandfather. Your dad is really proud of you.
Thank you. I hope so. I wake up every day trying to do him right.
He is. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did recording it. As always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show was recorded here in Los Angeles and produced by the incomparable Deanna Bernal in Mexico City. We can only grow this show by you listening and sharing the show with friends. So please find, follow, subscribe, and share our audio-only show on Spotify, Apple, or via any other popular podcasting platforms, as well as find the video version of our show now available on our YouTube channel over at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And of course, you can follow along on our various social media platforms for fun and informative clips and content at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, wherever you can find us. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at I Am Rob Ryan on just about any social media platform. Gracias, thank you, and have an awesome day.